All right, are we set? We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Take the roll.
Alderman Piccarelli?
Here.
Alderwoman Day? Here. Alderman Craig?
Here.
Dennis?
Here.
John is absent. Sarah?
Present.
And Ahmed.
All right. Stand, please. Pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was over there.
Yes.
Okay.
For a while.
Just seeing if we're paying attention.
It's not just you.
Okay, item 2 is citizens comment period. Since I see no one is opted to join us this evening, go ahead and close the citizens comment period, and we'll move on to item number 3, which is a continuation of our previous meetings that you're all familiar with, aware of, and reviewing the budgetary detail. Danielle, where does that leave us?
So that leaves us on, I know tonight we were going to talk about the capital outlay fund. I intended on talking about the self-insurance fund. However, Kelly and I will be working very hard tomorrow to finalize some stuff for the self-insurance fund for personnel. We just finally got our renewal rates yesterday morning, so I don't have that finalized. So before we start, what I wanted to bring up was the fact that late this afternoon, I did receive a statement of assessment from our assessors, and with that does allow me to start to really fill in my levy limit worksheet, fill in my tax rate worksheet, what that looks like. And with that, it's going to take some time, and I know we kind of discussed that back on Monday. There's going to be some challenges, and with that, I think the best recommendation for tonight is to discuss the capital outlay fund, discuss the changes that we've had so far, and if there's any recommended changes for the Common Council. Come back on October 22nd, where we will have finalized self-insurance fund rates and a more finalized levy. And with that, we will have to have a special Common Council meeting on October 29th to those finance recommended changes.
10/22 is what your proposed date?
Yes. It'll give it's our normal finance committee meeting.
That's what I was going to say.
But that will give Kelly, myself, and the mayor, like I said, the next week to really look at what the levy looks like and what our availability is for the levy and the funds that are all affected. But I did want to talk about the capital improvement fund, and we do have at least some good news, because I did say that I made a change, or I made a error on the capital improvement fund. So if everybody wants to flip to page 235. So really the capital outlay fund is our general capital assets. We have a tax levy. Sometimes if we've allocated tax levy to the capital outlay fund in the past, we have not done it in the last 3 to 5 years. So it's mainly landfill siting revenue, grants, investment earnings, and then any retired equipment sales. This year we have $954,000 allocated from landfill siting resources. We have $32,000 in grants, donations, and sales, and $26,000 in investment earnings. We did not anticipate any debt in this fund this year. And so you'll see initially, I'll walk through the initial and then what's going to be changing. So the initial was we had about $1 million to spend. And so the mayor, Kelly, and I went through department priorities, met with a couple of the department heads to determine what the needs were, what the capital outlay fund was going to look like for 2025. And so the overall plan for 2025 was going to be really draw in hard on our IT expenditures, really get our IT infrastructure up to the spot it needs to be. So you'll see IT is one of the biggest components in this year. A lot of
page. IT.
236 starts it, but we have IT separated out by each department. So each department that you'll see, every department pretty much needs computer equipment or some sort of software equipment.
Because I was looking at 240.
Yep.
Computer equipment down about $6,000.
Yes, because what happened was in 2023, the IT director went through and determined the entire equipment of computers, laptops, monitors, iPads, everything for the entire city. And basically came up with two sections or two phases. So phase one was all of the capital computer equipment and everything that was needed, printers for 2024, to kind of just even it out.
Okay.
So the planning department in that case got a little bit more last year, and then only less needs to be replaced for phase two.
Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, so computer equipment, software, we have $100,000 for the UDO rewrite. And it's not actually the UDO rewrite, it's that line
The
item, but it's the comprehensive
comprehensive
master plan.
Yep. That was the software, was it like 4,500? Or, oh, this is W.
So we allocated $300,000 for a sidewalk snow machine to the DPW department. We allocated $8,000 to elections for their Badger books. They are going to be replacing those basically for a year. Development on trees, that's offset by an escrow that we receive every year from developers. What is this? The DPW lease program is about $80,000, which is going to replace a large chunk of their trucks and vehicles. Like I said, all the IT infrastructure, which does include new servers, data switch replacements. You can find all that on page 211 and 212 if you want a breakdown of exactly what everybody's getting from IT. But it's mainly the data switch replacements, servers, and then PC replacements.
Yeah, I think the theme of everything is kind of deferred maintenance is killing us, and we're trying to get caught up on what has been deferred, and we are at the point where we have to spend money on certain things. We just can't.
So to the IT one, a couple times ago we were talking about that with like the core switch that needs to be upgraded because go to a newer SAN and all that kind of stuff, right? And we were discussing we really need to be looking at moving maybe
Cloud.
quicker to cloud.
Yeah.
I guess that's one of the things I do want to, once we get through this, is discuss there a budget that can help with that.
Are you asking
I'm
for
so easily distracted by
2026
that.
or possibly take what we have for the
Take-
stuff in 2025 and maybe
Yeah, and
reconfigure into?
so maybe take some from
Start,
the
like,
switch
planning, right.
and then move that over into something to start getting more to do
Cloud.
something quicker.
Now, I do recall that conversation, and what stands out for me was Dr. Metelsky saying that we still will have to have some on-prem, and that one of the things that eats up a ton of space is videos, and I don't think that's
Oh,
going
for
to
the
go
police
away.
department,
Yeah,
yeah.
go away anytime soon. So, would we have to do like a hybrid, or?
Well, we should vet, so that what I'm thinking here is do something of an assessment to figure out everything you can move and how quickly you can move it and anything you need to remain, and then from that you can decide, because video is something that is very cloud
Friendly,
friendly,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of tools to edit and everything that are on cloud as well. So in my mind, those aren't. I think that needs to be refreshed to figure out if there's anything that you can't move,
Right.
because there's a lot of changes that have happened, and a lot more security and all those things. So maybe 10 years ago we would have gone like, we don't want PPI there and other things, right? That has changed significantly.
Yeah.
So
100%, and I know that he had also spoken, director had spoken to, if we were more cloud-based, it would be easier to manage the security element
Correct.
of everything too.
Yep.
So
and that it allows
Kinda
more
twofold.
focus on the stuff that you need to deliver, right? And less on like trying to work on the sand and stuff like that. I mean, it's just there's only so much time, right? And,
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what can be done is look at stuff that actually we do that kind of like really badly and something we are never going to move to the cloud. So focus on those items, and then maybe the cloud part, as we said, we could probably start looking at it earlier rather than
right. So if I'm understanding what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about maybe a meeting with select people to really kind of par down and look at, from a strategic standpoint, what can go now, what has to stay, and get numbers and get a plan together
Yeah.
for a roadmap.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And right, and a kind of a rough schedule,
Yeah.
because obviously you could figure out that maybe if you spend a little bit of money, you can move faster, right? On
Right.
some things, and kind of get past assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes
I like
sense.
that
'cause-
plan. The money's there. I mean, we're already woefully behind the times. A couple of
Right.
extra months to vet this out and make sure that we do it in a more strategic way, I think is better than spending money that we don't need to spend if we're just going to change it in a year or two.
Well, and it
And the good thing about the cloud is like mostly it's not any upfront costs coming.
Right. It's
So
a
more
subscription.
subscription model, so everything. So
Once you get established, there are ways to, if you want to treat it differently, and that gets into the finance side, and then we'll go into details on it, but there are ways to prepay and things like that, but you need to most likely get there first, get established, and get kind of what call it a run rate on what your costs are, and then you can look at those kind of things.
And I'm all for looking at that. And I was just going to say that I think it's in our capital improvement plan to say 2028 and 2029
29, I
to
saw
move
that. So it's actually
cloud
2025.
migration, but
But
I'm not
do the
opposed to
legwork
moving it
to
up.
see how soon we could do it and if it's
Right.
viable or not. Yeah,
Right,
it makes
'cause you got
100% sense.
Yeah, because you got 80,000 you're going to spend right now, and can you
Invest it
Yes,
into the
invest-
future versus
Correct.
spending it on something that's going to be archaic in a year or two.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Okay.
The other thing that we have in this fund is $36,000 for the 2 advanced cardiac monitors. Those were the ones that were approved in 2024 by the council. We got the grant.
Yeah.
And so they allowed us to pay upfront just the grant dollars that we received, which I think was like $14,000, and then pay the rest in 2025. So that obligation is in there. The quads, the fleet lease program, which I'll touch on in a second. And then, yes, the $100,000 for the comprehensive master plan. So when I was meeting with Enterprise Fleet about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, they brought to my attention that they had done some newer cash flows and determined what vehicles and what squads they could get for the police department in 2025. And then told me that the cash flow that they gave me was not realistic because they knew that they weren't going to be getting all those vehicles. The one that they gave me was as if we had all 25 vehicles on January 1st. And so he did a more in-depth cash flow, like I know we're going to have these 4 vehicles by January, and then we're going to add a few in March. So he did it, which actually cut our costs like $240,000 for 2025. Plus, it also allowed us to roll over some funds from 2024 to 2025. What happened was we allocated about $240,000 for squads in 24, and we went out. We bought those 4 squads at Hiller Ford. We had a PO outstanding for it. We didn't pay Hiller Ford until we actually got the delivery. However, Enterprise Fleet intercepted those for us, and paid for them themselves and then are just adding it to our lease program. So in reality, we are never paying that $240,000. So we are rolling that over. So ultimately, we have about $240,000, $250,000 to use in 2025. So that being said, that's what I wanted to talk about. Ooh, we got $250,000. And after meeting with Kelly and the mayor and making some phone calls, it looks like we are going to invest in, if you guys recommend it, the tasers and the body cameras for the police department.
Yeah.
I would take it off your list. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and we did. You're probably going to answer this.
I reached out to our insurance company and Lisa did, and everything is included in our municipal insurance already for the use of the taser. So there's nothing additional there because I know the concern was they weren't going to have a warranty or any sort of coverage afterwards. So we are fine there. There was also a concern of the police department needing a records clerk if the body cameras went forward because they were unsure of what those records requests were going to look like. However, due to the constraints, we just said, unfortunately, Chief, that's not something we can provide in 2025, but we are willing to provide these body cameras. And he was like, absolutely, I'll take it. We'll make it work. By the time they implement it and train them, it's going to be mid-year anyways, and then we can really see what kind of requests are coming in and how often. And then moving from that to the cloud-based, I assume that, now knowing that we're going to be doing that, it might make more sense to start moving a little bit quicker on the cloud-based, knowing that we're going to be doing that. And then the last thing before you do it, because I'll just point out, so the other thing, and those two together is about $110,000. So we are also going to include the mold remediation to the fire department, and we're including $50,000 for that. So it's still going to leave us with a little surplus in 2025. However, there's some crucial IT issues that have already been approved by the council that it's going to use some of that fund balance. So we just said, hey, it'll kind of be a wash because we're going to use it in 24, but we know it's going to be additional in 2025. So that is where we left off at the capital improvement fund, or capital outlay fund.
Well, what I wanted to say was the clerk piece of it and how we did speak with the chief, and his reaction was, yeah, I'm not going to let a gift horse in the mouth, and I'll take what I can get. And we had talked about how that would work, or at least how we saw it working. And the other piece of it is depending on who we go with as a provider in the future for a website, there are components, I know Granicus, and you maybe pay for it, but there are components of open record requests that they would naturally pull from what you have out in the cloud that might also be captured in, we could potentially kill two birds, one stone, depending on what we're looking for, our expectations, and what we have to,
I would also think there's got to be at some point cloud offerings that help with the action and other things that you have to do on the videos, because let's face it, everybody's having that. So
right. I mean, it's like Adobe does the redactions on your PDFs. You hit redact and it automatically does it for you. So yeah, to that point, probably something out there for video. We're not inventing the wheel on anything here, so
no,
in fact, we're really late too.
I was gonna say everybody else has been there for a while.
They've already vetted all of the issues.
Correct.
We're coming in at the good sweet spot, right?
Well, the chief may have to, or the department or city may have some investigation with their neighboring community municipalities that are already on it. What did they learn works, what doesn't, what do they recommend, etc.
And I know that during that conversation, the mayor did mention, what is it, Axio? Axion?
Yeah, the body camera vendor.
Yeah, there's extensive training that they provide as well, and maybe some of that would lend itself to maybe open records and some of that overlap.
So that was all I had from outstanding from October 7th. Now, again, I apologize, I wasn't here on the 26th. all met on the 24th. So I hope you guys made some notes. I've obviously made all of my notes on what I heard from department heads without any sort of guarantees, but where that leaves us operationally. I know we're not going to be able to touch a lot on it tonight with that being the general fund and us. I mean, we can touch on some recommendations and what you guys would like to see, but overall, what the levy looks like and how much revenue we have, again, will be another conversation for the three of us to come back to you guys on the 22nd. So I'm happy to just, I would assume the next steps would be probably either 3 or 4. Three or 5. If we just want to talk about some changes now, or if we just want to move to 4 and then come back. Is there any further discussion on these issues?
I have one thing.
Go ahead.
Because we voted on a couple of things in council last week that I believe the first was from Inspection Services. I believe when Justin was here, he said that their E-Plan software was not actually in the budget. So we would have to, whatever that cost, put that in the budget. Which I know that I'm just saying it out loud.
So there was
It's
no
a
cost.
revenue.
It's a revenue
stream.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no cost to. We just get a 10% cut
They-
every time.
And then we're just kind of assuming, is there any assumed knowledge of what that is coming in, or we're just gonna
To be
think
honest,
be
I
happy
asked
when it
them
comes?
to. That's kind of the conversation that Justin and I had was, how do we know? Because every development is still going to have a choice. They can either use our service, our E-Plan service, and be guaranteed, pay a little bit more, but be guaranteed 15 business days or whatever that expectation is. Or they can still go to the state and the city gets nothing. So it's really hard to determine what each developer, how do you determine what revenue you're going to receive. We had talked about throwing in a flat 10,000 in there for next year, keeping it really conservative, because I think our cut only being 10%.
I don't know if because there were a few cities that were somewhat similar to us in I think in population and in just kind of what the city feels like, that maybe it's
Do you
something that we
remember
could.
any of those?
I'd have to go back into my packet because he had the list because they gave us the full spiel from the company, and they had the list of all the municipalities, and there were a few that were around the 35,000 mark as far as population, but there were also some that were, I think, not exactly apples to apples in population, but when I thought about like development wise, where they were as far as development happening, that I thought would be on
Or
par
applicable
to,
or comparable.
So I don't know if it's a way that if that company would be willing to kind of just average, a city of our size, what they normally see.
Yeah. The other thing I could do is pull up, a couple of their budgets. I know I think Menominee Falls has been with them for a really long time. Beloit has been with them for a really long time. So pulling up budget.
I think,
See what they average.
from the perspective, though, of just the plan in general, it's a huge bonus for us because we're not spending anything to add this additional service. And then, in fact, not only are we not spending anything, but we'll be getting something in return.
Nice. On the other one that is just honestly peanuts, but we voted through the language line for the clerk, so that was like a $300 increase in that line item for them that they said they were out. So
The circuit court, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so yeah, let me add that to.
I know it's a little chunk change, but we voted it through. So
So good to add.
And then we talked about clear with
ClearGov. I meant to bring that up. I apologize. What we ended up talking about is holding off a year on the website redevelopment.
Yep.
So we took 20,000 out. We added the 48,000 for ClearGov
Okay.
for the capital outlay fund. So that still leaves us ultimately with all those changes. It still leaves us in the black $66,000.
Okay. And then when we were talking about earlier with the kind of a cloud assessment kind of thing, the website part should be part of that, because the website really should be pulling from
Yes.
all the other stuff. So getting back to your open records and all those other things. So
It
if you
doesn't
think-
hurt to wait on the website.
yeah, so you can actually get that stuff
Yeah.
aligned so that it's not like this other thing on the side you always have to make.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that there are companies, I'm trying to think of, I think all of the companies website design also offer, you know, like their Cadillac or Platinum level service, and I'm certain at least one of them has that ability to post the information and pull from it, and that is Granicus, because I've sat on a demo call with them last year sometime. I mean, it was pretty slick. People are putting in open records requests through the website, and the website is doing an OCR and pulling the information and providing it. And, you know, it's obviously keeping like a documentation of those requests, and it's expeditious. And
The only problem that I see with that is it's probably very specified scopes. Meaning, when we get those records requests that are like, I want notes and I want all these spreadsheets that are in your system. I mean, we wouldn't just put all of our spreadsheets on the website.
Right.
So if they're looking for specific like ordinances, resolutions,
right,
or,
but
That's-
cover a lot.
Yeah.
Well, that's where you're the DMS, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
If you set that up correctly, then you can use that to do that, and
Right.
it'll filter out what's stuff versus
Yep.
what stuff that you would
Yep.
provide, right? All that kind of.
Yeah. So like the IT solutions, the document management solutions, and the website, there should be
Kinda like
the
all
ability
of
to
it.
kind of, yeah,
Yep.
to wrap them all together.
anything else from the meeting?
Nothing that can't wait.
I was gonna say the big ones that were on my list were the ones you just said that you were including. So.
Well, and I think a lot of them are just, challenges that we've already discussed. Each department head is struggling to do their daily. So most of that operational side of everything is going to come on the 22nd when we can really dive into the general fund. So
Municipal court had a few presented general.
it just ends up being stuff to do your job.
Right.
And most of the time you can't not buy it, whether you have a budget or not. It's really challenging. So, figuring out that levy will be very, very nice.
Anybody else have any comments? I just wanted to talk a little bit about the salaries and kind of what the strategy is with payroll. Kind of this in-city and out-of-city. Because I know this group has been presented with challenges of kind of the
Retention?
yeah, retention issues and hiring and the merit kind of plan and just kind of maybe how this all kind of fits together or how this becomes a building block, I guess. So.
I can start. So, two separate things. Recruitment and retention and merit. Okay? And recruitment and retention are, I mean, every jurisdiction's having a problem with that. And looking at our budget, which is going to be a big challenge for the next step coming up, the next point on here, and that's going to lead into it as far as what our challenges are and where our budget's at, is looking to balance a retention factor and what's reasonable in our competitive arena and what can we afford. And we're at zero what we can afford, but we cannot have a zero raise because we're going to have mass exodus out of this. We don't want to take that risk. Okay, maybe we do, maybe we don't argue it, but I think it's poor management to do it that way. So we look at a 2%, which, last year we gave a 3%, no cuts in service, no reduction in staff. This year, looking at a 2% and a 3% if you live in the city of Franklin. Okay? Other jurisdictions have done that successfully, especially like West Dallas. And then what does that mean in dollars and cents? And that at this point means approximately $28,000 impact on our budget to offer that extra 1% to those that live in the city. And I think it's a technique, perhaps, it's a position to take to help in retention and perhaps possible recruitment. But we have to be in the reality realm that we have to. It's much more money, obviously, to go out, hire somebody new, train them, outfit them, and get them to work, opposed to retaining what we currently have here. So, and then those that live in the city, kind of like how we're going to try to propose redoing some fee structures. You know, if you are a city resident, there is a benefit to being part of this community. You work in the community, you live in the community. There should be a benefit for that, not just, hey, thanks for being dedicated. So that was my premise for bringing that forward, for that extra 1% for those that live.
How does that affect the merit side of it? Because I just think about it, if you have like people doing similar tasks and they're getting paid different rates because of a zip code.
I could tell you that there's really no merit process. When I came in last year, there hadn't been a performance review provided, and this is per the HR manager, in like the last 15 years. So people really aren't getting paid based upon the work they're doing. It's literally just it's just a blanket application to everybody, regardless of who's working their butts off and who's not.
Right.
Which is in and of itself a very big problem.
Well, and I'm familiar with that, and I know that's something that's been talked about, I think, in prior councils and generations and so on and so forth. And I'm just wondering how this fits in, or adds fuel to the fire, or whatever way you want to kind of look at it.
I'll say this, I wasn't part of this conversation when the mayor originally brought it forward, but I do see in that there is an argument to be said about living here and investing money in taxes and sales and what have you. You're investing in the community you're living in, so there is an argument to be said about that 1% difference with that alone.
And do you envision, then I guess I look at it at the next, kind of, is this something that becomes repetitive year after year after year?
Well, to answer that question is maybe. And it depends on how our budget looks every year. I prefer, my goal was, again, to give a 3% with a flat increase. And didn't realize the financial position we're in, because I believe that 3% raise helped with recruitment and retention. And I figured I could split a little bit of a difference this year in the budget by offering those that live in the city that extra 1%. And then next year, if we are in a better position, my goal would be return back to the 3% across the board.
I mean, I can say, having seen other analyses of comparable wages and stuff, we're falling further and further behind in terms of comparableness to our communities. So at this stage, it's sort of, do we want to be behind or really behind? I mean, from a recruitment standpoint, it's just becoming less and less to work with.
And what I'll say from the financial side of it, this was brought up kind of late in the game, and I had my team run multiple scenarios to see what it looked like. Obviously, we have union negotiations that we have to stick with, but for all of our non-reps, I had, what does 1%, what does 2% look like, what does 3% look like, what does the 2 and 3 for residents look like, what does 1 and we tried all of this, and so like the mayor said, it was only a $28,000 difference from giving all the non-reps 2% to add on those few residents that live in Franklin at getting the 3%. However, going forward, to be fair, and this hasn't been a question that's been brought up, so,
There's been no discussion on
yeah,
that.
so, but my personal opinion would be, I think it would be unfair to not offer something like this year after year, to say a resident gets it now and then next year we're just doing flat for everybody. I would say a percentage, whether it's a 0.5% or 1%, needs to always be set for Franklin residents. So if next year it's a 1% for everybody, the two, if it's 3 for everybody, then they get 4. Like, just it's, to have that number set versus, well, I'm going to say this year they get a 2%, because we can afford that because you live in Franklin. I think there's got to be some structure there that just hasn't been really talked about.
I just kind of sat back and, think about it in a more of a macro. And again, I mean, the reason I just brought this up is kind of get some discussion with the rest of the committee members as well. But if it's not a huge dollar amount, 28 grand, if we lose one person because of this, differentiation, is it worth it? And again, we could cut this any different, number of different ways, instead of 2%, 3%, or whatever. Everybody gets, 1.8 or whatever. But I just kind of look at it from a couple different things. One is the legal standpoint. If you have multiple people doing similar jobs, different pay rate, is there any discrimination there, et cetera, et cetera?
Well,
But we already have that though too. I mean, because you have multiple people doing relatively similar jobs for different pay structure.
Legally, I've looked into it with the league. There hasn't been any pushback or anything on not being able to do that. But to your point, I think it does become, do you lose people because now they're mad that, well, just because I don't live in Franklin, I don't get the raise, that I'm going to leave and go somewhere else? Or is it really a retention tool where people are like, okay, maybe that may incentivize me to go move into the community I work for? I don't know. I look at it a little bit glass half.
Well-
Are we going to lose people for that change instead of it just all being flat?
Right. And I don't know that, necessarily losing people is maybe the far left-hand side of the
Yes.
spectrum. But I'm just wondering, from a morale standpoint, if we think there's no merit and no, kind of parameters that people are judged on their
They're
performance
supposed to be.
now, and, we kind of put this other tool out there, that says, well, we're not getting reviewed anyway. It's like, I'm not part of the in-city, network or whatever. I just would hate to see that over a small dollar amount, which I just don't know. That's why I just kind of brought it up to kind of get some feedback or thoughts on other folks.
Yeah, what's the motivation behind it? I mean, what do you expect to get out of it? 3%.
Well, the motivation is to what Kelly alluded to and stated was, live in the community, work in the community, you're vested in the community, you're invested in the community, and here's the extra 1% for being part of this whole plan. And that's my, if there's people that don't like it or don't agree with it, I believe it's been successful in some other communities.
Yeah.
And I think
Milwaukee,
that's,
for one.
and that's the same with West Dallas, and they've been doing that for many years. And I just think that's that. So that's me just looking at it, to quote your macro term, looking at the whole city, the city as a whole. I mean, if you're going to be here, why not? That's an incentive. Maybe some people move in. I disagree that someone's going to be that disgruntled and say, well, because I'm only getting my 2% raise and somebody's getting a 3%, I'm out. I mean, I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, there's not that many employees. It's 28,000. Maybe, Courtney worked here, for a number of years. Maybe you're going to hear people say a lot of things. Saying and doing are two different things.
People are going to be upset over just
Some will.
getting a 2 or 3% pay increase because we're not keeping up with CPI. I mean, that's a reality too, and that's going to happen regardless of how this is applied. I think that there is a valid argument for it in terms of, if you are living and working and spending your money in a certain community, any community, you are likely more invested in that community. and you're giving more, and you're probably a better employee as well. To that end, because you're working, you're living in the community, you're interacting with others. You know, it's important that you're not being lynched by people. You know what I mean? I think that there is that maybe there is I guess there's always an other side and another argument to things as well. But ultimately, that money still goes here.
John? go ahead.
And just as an alternative thought, and I know this is hard to do when you got unions and you got government, which is not as easy to do, but I mean, if you were running a private business, say, okay, well, how about using that as a bonus pool to reward people who work a little harder than the guy next door to them?
Well, that's what we talked about. There's two different things. There's that pot of money for that, you know, recognizing that, and there's the other for the recruitment and retention piece. So, you know, yes, we need to have that other bigger picture, but then again, now so now when you work, and we'll go down this rabbit hole, so now when you work for government, and we normally get our 2% raise, and now somebody else is going to get an extra, 2%, and then that's going to be looked at as, well, what do they do? Well, how do they get it? Oh, they're friends with so-and-so. Then you have that whole mess, and you're going to have that argument. I mean, we can sit there. I've been in government over 30 years and working with contracts, and this is what you're going to get for a raise, and that's what you get for the raise. And if you went on a merit base, well, what's your merit base? How is that determined? It's really subjective. And merit bases are really subjective unless you put down some very strict guidelines. But when you've got all these different departments, how do you judge what the health department's doing? I mean, there's all sorts of ways in which I think that's a dangerous thing. It's nice to look at and perhaps do something with how quality of work, whatever workload, again, subjective.
How often are people given their reviews?
Kelly, you want to answer that?
When I started last year, I was told by the HR manager it had been about a decade and a half since people were provided reviews. When I asked her why that is, she said managers didn't want to be, or department heads didn't want to be put in a position where they're doing that. Now, personally, I do have to question, is that just usurping responsibility and a cop-out for not actually evaluating performance? I would argue yes. But it's also become, unfortunately, the norm. And, at this stage, it comes down to, well,
it's hard to complain about employee performance if you don't give them a review.
That, right. But and then also, again, and I keep going back to this, there is a extreme inequity in performance too.
Yeah, right.
And that is also that's a problem that really has to be addressed, and I don't know how you address that without going back to the merit piece of it too. I mean, if
well, for any position, you should have defined roles and responsibilities.
Well, job descriptions exist. Yeah. There just hasn't been these annual reviews. I mean, there's job descriptions, and when an employee isn't doing their work, I mean, this is a whole thing. It's an HR problem that has been bestowed on the HR manager, and who's been here almost 20 years. And we're looking at, well, that's an HR function. Absolutely. It's not the function of the elected officials to come in and tell that person what their job is. But then on the flip side, what is your job? Why aren't you implementing these things? And they should be done. It shouldn't be the mayor or the electeds. This should be on the HR manager. It's a human resources function to do this.
Well, in a normal HR function, they would supervise but it's usually up to the department.
Well, it'd be department head management to conduct it, but here's your 5-page review sheet designed by human resources and tracked and implemented and kept in a file
and made sure
and
people
all
are
that
meeting
stuff.
their deadlines
Right.
and doing it.
Oh yeah, we know the department head is in charge of managing their people and guiding, but still, that whole process should be initiated.
It should be managed and
Needs to
handled by
become-
HR.
Needs to become part of their responsibilities, and if they're not maintained, that employee pool may not even be eligible for this, whatever the consequences. But that kind of gets back to this do this kind of just blanket across and there's not any basis or whatever. I just get back to the, this be looked at as discriminatory or whatever, open up a can of worms that we probably don't want to be anywhere near.
The problem is that, when you are doing a blanket percentage, you are rewarding people that aren't working and doing their jobs. I can think of a couple that have, on the actual job description, not hitting some pretty important areas. And then you are telling somebody that is a high productive performer, like, sorry, this is what it is, and what you're doing essentially is driving off the good people because they know that they could go somewhere else and get paid for their actual performance. And then all you're left with are people that are just coming in, being present, punching a clock, and then counting down and going out.
Taking up space.
Yeah. The silent quitters.
Yep.
Right? Isn't that the term that's being used? And so, what had been taking place, my understanding is that every year around a certain time, the HR manager will request of department heads, is everybody performing satisfactorily or not? And those who aren't eligible for the pay increase. I don't know if anybody's actually said, no, this person's not performing or underperforming. But that's how it's been handled. What's that?
You need documentation for that.
Yeah, right.
Right.
If you haven't had any reviews, you don't have any documentation.
You know what I mean?
Well, and I mean, there's things that I happen to know for a fact where I had said I want this in so-and-so's personnel file, and then in conversations with other people who have seen so-and-so's personnel file, it's not there. So yeah, documentation is another concern for that.
Well, how can you even terminate someone if you don't have a review in there?
I mean,
The person is not performing the way they should.
For performance, yes. For other,
Just got to at least
yeah,
document that.
exactly. Thank you. There are other reasons that you could. I guess it just depends on pull the trigger on something like that, regardless.
Any other comments? Yes, go ahead.
So I will say that I personally think this is a mistake. It caught my attention when I first saw it, but I thought this through. I've worked in municipal government for 15 years. I've worked in the private sector for just as long, so I've seen any number of ways that pay increases are handled. And by and large, things like this don't improve staff morale overall. The thought that if there's a person who's worked here for all things being equal, you have a person who's worked here for 10 years that lives in Muskego and they're getting a 2% raise, and a person who's been here for 1 year but lives in Franklin, they're getting a 3% raise, that's going to cause issues internally within that department. Whether it's intended or not, it's going to. It's just human nature that is going to happen. The questions I was going to ask how much this was, so it's $28,000. My thought would be is I understand what you're saying also about a blanket 2% and you're still not rewarding people, but I really, really feel like with the turnover we've had in department directors and new leadership in your level, that putting together some sort of merit pay program, and I'm sure in your past life there was probably a pretty robust merit pay system that your company used. And there are programs out there that you don't even have to make it up. They exist. You just, pay for the software and it does it for you. So I think a better investment of that money and the merit pay stuff that we have is to actually buckle down and do it, and then reward those people who are doing the job, because that's the retention and that's the recruitment piece. Because I've been in a ton of interviews over my time in health departments, whether it was here or TOSA, and one of the questions that always comes up is about merit pay or about, like longevity and future, incentives for working. And that's something that Franklin can't ever really say they have. So it is a benefit for retention.
Well, and to your point, so we have ADP services for checks, and now we have the carrier connection that's taking place. There are pieces to that contract that we could add where we could have everything as electronic. People's personnel files are there. We are able to perform performance reviews online and in real time and have that out and have it pushed to somebody else when my part of it's done and that sort of thing. There's pieces of the ADP contract that we currently have that we aren't using that's HR related. So I mean, I think, could we? Yes. Should we? Yes. We need to get there and do it.
And I will say, I agree with what Danielle said, that if you put it in, it has to stay in, whatever it is. You can't go back and forth with it, because that will make it absolutely worse than it already might be. But then it just compounds. So if it's 2 and 3, and then the next year it's 2 and 3, then it's still a little bit more and a little bit more. And then you really, after a few years, you're really getting some inequity between the two spots, if all other things are equal. So year over year, it would get worse.
Well, that's why in the private sector, if you're going to give employees extra money, you should do it in the form of a bonus. That way you're not committed permanently for some money.
The other thing, from a labor standpoint, that was brought to my attention from the finance department was that it will only be about 2 to 3 years before we have some really big issues of compression within the police and fire department, within the public works department. And then also you have people that are already pretty much at the top of their 65 percentile or the top of their grade, and in a year or two they're going to be well over that because they live in Franklin. So that was an issue where there would have to be some policy changes or something, then equal that out. And then again, where does that money come from, and how do you tell somebody when it comes to a compression issue, well, we'll just bump you up so that doesn't happen, or we'll, whatever that may look like.
Or we'll keep you where you are even though your performance is meeting requirements and stuff like that. There's all kinds of issues with this aspect of things. We have people that come in and are starting more than somebody that gets a promotion. That's inherently wrong. That is not acceptable. Does it happen? Every single time. And why? Because that's how the system's set up. And there are people that are coming in with, a different position, and the difference is only a few bucks an hour difference.
So can I ask why you think that's wrong, or is it because it's just not fair because they've been here longer, or maybe does the new person coming in have way more experience, or
it's because
when they got hired, their starting wage was way lower, so they didn't get to the point where now starting wages 15 years later are here. I just don't know how equitable you're just going to go making things because of one person.
It's not one person, it's actually everybody. And it's because of the maximums that are put on us from a policy standpoint. So, you can only go from 5 to 7.5%, and you are required this and that. And then people are coming in and they see a pay range that's really kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an advertised, this is what you could make. It's a bait and switch. Here's our pay range.
That's like the whole range.
Right, it's the entire range. And then you're getting people that are applying that are making somewhere in that range. And what do we do with people that we promote? We put them at the absolute bottom because we can. And it doesn't matter what the experience level is, could be the same. And it's just how it ends up working between that policy of not going over 7.5 and of an increase over the prior position. And also because if you're going to try to recruit people, you have to at least try to be comparable with your competitors in that recruiting stage. And I think what we had determined is it would take 16 years for somebody to meet the 65th percentile, which also is a whole nother issue. Nobody wants to to have it put on them, and this is how everybody takes it, that you're only getting paid for 65% of your time and your worth and what you're putting into everything. It's a very big, complex issue.
Has personnel kind of looked at this and dug this apart, pulled it apart, or is that another area that's
Painful.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we just did the compensation study, and we got some results, and even just looking at it financially, it's just so not feasible that it hasn't been brought back to personnel, because where's the money gonna come from to change the compensation study to be more equitable with our communities, and then take away the 65%? Or what does that look like?
Well, and the compensation study too was less than ideal. I mean, we're spending $19,000 for an agency to provide us with a spreadsheet of other what they think are like positions, and then giving us those amounts. But it's most positions here, except for maybe police, fire, and I'm not even sure if there's others. There's a comparable in the private sector where we couldn't even come close to meeting or being competitive. And that's most positions. It's not just, a few.
Yeah. Jason and then John, I think.
I just want to kind of piggyback on a couple of things that has already been spoken about. Where I asked this previously, email, and Dennis, you kind of touched on it about the legality, and thank you for clearing that up for me. I really wasn't sure, but when Alderwoman Day talks about where we have leadership, where some of that stuff, that paralysis by the former leadership, I don't know if that's going to be an obstacle. I think what may be a really smaller thing would be where if we went with a flat rate this year and established baselines on employees through a robust review process, really getting a process in place moving forward for all employees. Okay, 2024-25, we established your baseline productivity and taking that $28,000 and putting that towards, all right, well, this is what will go moving into the future. And at least that way, then there's funding available for merit increases based on merit that's already been established. And then the 25 or the 26 budget, possibly saying like, okay, well, if we went with this before, we don't have to have that change of that 1%, which was what the woman Dave mentioned about, and Director Brown about how years into the future would be really desperate outcomes. That at least this way, then we have a baseline and having a start fund so that it isn't just like, okay, well, we only have like $20 to work from as far as increases go, where we start with a point of $28,000 of funding to begin with, and then kind of grow that sort of that dollar amount for a much more robust pool to draw from.
John?
Yeah, well, you kind of answered what I always wanted to know. When the compensation study was done. When was that done?
Last year, and it was really, it was half-heartedly done, I guess. And there's information that, again, we are dealing with private sector as a factor as well that wasn't even considered. And we have comparables that I don't know are necessarily comps.
Well, where you're classified, is your nonprofit versus private versus government. Those are all legitimate classifications that should be taken into account in your compensation study. Set up your compensation tables. So it doesn't sound like you got the study, but you didn't do anything.
Not necessarily, because there are employees that obviously people have seen what the results were and strongly disagreed with what the salary ranges were and provided information that shows differently. And I guess the point is, if you have a comparable position in the private sector, that is our competition. It's not just public sector. It's everywhere for whatever position that is.
Yes.
There's one thing that I forgot to bring up. I remember this predates my time here by maybe a year or two. I'm not sure if it predates your time on council, Mayor, but staff had told me, and I believe the previous health officer told me as well, that the previous comp study, not the one that was just done, but the previous one.
In 2015.
Yeah, when that was done, everybody was kind of lowballed. And at the time, the council said, they accepted the comp study, and the council at the time said, we'll put money away for merit pay. So we understand that these salaries are low, and it kind of hits everybody in the feels, but, do good work. We're going to put this merit policy in place, and if you do good work, you'll be rewarded in that manner. But then that never came to fruition. They kept putting money away every year on the budget, but the actual policy never came through. So the staff that are still here that remember that last comp study, they remember that very vividly, that they were sort of promised or told that, there's going to be this merit pay. So they want that. That piece to come through, however it comes through. But that was, so I think that didn't help, because then that set a bar, 10 years ago now, that we're struggling to fight now.
I think that the comp study from almost 10 years ago was not well received at all, and it was not something that the city was necessarily behind, but they adopted regardless because they spent the money. And I think that right there is a huge problem. But I did want to say, and this is why I put my finger up when Alderman Craig was talking, is we do actually have a merit pool. And I know that my predecessor was looking into doing something with it. I don't know how far that got. But yeah, there was a merit pool fund. I don't know how much is in there now after some of the stuff that we've had to pull from it, but
what I will say is, to piggyback off of that, I pulled it up, and for 2024, and even carrying some years forward, we're at about 150,000, and so my recommendation was going to be to pull it from the 25 budget, because there's an extra 125,000 in the budget, maybe allocate that and come back on the 22nd with some discussions of, okay, well, we have $150,000 that's sitting here that we can roll over into next year. We don't have to allocate an extra $125,000 and pretty much double that merit pool for something that isn't even policy regulated, doesn't have anything that we can really say that we can use it for, and allocate that $125,000 somewhere else operationally or something along those lines. That's
or
just
a
my
1%
recommendation.
to everybody instead
Or
of
no.
That's
or no or no. I guess.
Not after our talk earlier. No.
Yeah.
I mean, with regards to that merit pool that you're talking about, I mean, if you have set 3% for everybody, if you're merit based, basically that 3% that you set aside will have people from 1% to even up to 5%, the same amount of money that you set aside for that. So that gives, advantage to people who are performing versus non-performing. You get 1% if you're not performing, and the same amount of money, 3% across the board that you kept, can be given to people who are performing.
Yeah.
The problem is that not only has a merit pool program not been developed and put into place, but we're not even doing performance reviews, and we're not documenting even concerns. I mean, concerns are being missed in personnel files, so it's kind of a bigger issue.
And I did read in a budget, and I don't remember, I don't know if I can now, but I can find it when I was looking at some merit pool things. It was a municipality that has a resolution or an ordinance that they would take a percentage annually of any unspent personnel services Like, let's just say the total city personnel services, there was $100,000 unspent due to vacancies or something, they would take
Unfilled position.
take a certain percentage of that and fund their merit pool, so they never had to really worry about dipping into their operation side. And if it was fully staffed for the whole year, then unfortunately that's just how it is. But then you might have another year where it can really get, it could really grow. So that might also be something, like I said, get 125,000 out. Look at developing. Here we'll implement it, and now this is how we're going to.
Right. And over the years, that concept, at least in the city of Franklin, there's been some pretty large personnel services rollovers from year to year budgets because of unfilled or timing of positions, whatever. Some of it's been budgetary ended, not to fill positions to a certain date, kind of step into it or whatever. But I mean, I think there's some good commentary here that I'm hearing, and maybe this takes a little bit more head scratching, whatever. But I kind of like hearing the ideas on the incentive versus, folks know that there's a pool out there that, hey, we can participate in. How large it is and whatever, maybe, and how it kind of all evolves and comes about is maybe minutiae in the detail, but at least it gets it back to that, hey, if I work hard,
I get rewarded.
do a good job, score, above average or whatever on, assessment or however, there's a reward for it, rather than again just maybe tied to a zip code. And I'm not, not downplaying that. Maybe there's a place in that, a place for that in the process as well. Bump it to your city, city resident. But just good comments and you to add.
Yeah, just real quick, I guess now that we have had conversation, those recommendations forward, is this something or the committee would like to see as a recommendation? Is on my list, and we'll talk about it at the meeting, but to take out the 2-tier for residents and non-residents, leave it as a flat rate, whether go back to the drawing board and say that 2 or 3 or whatever fund, or do we want to keep the personnel at?
I can go first.
And real quick, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I asked that because, again, it's going to be some real tweaking on our side over the next week and a half, so I just want to get that clear now so that when I go back tomorrow, I'm able to.
So, with all the discussion we've had, my view is to go back to whatever rate you come up with is the flat rate, and with the idea, we got to get this merit stuff put in place, and the predecessor to the merit is you got to get the reviews and all that kind of stuff, because we can't do merit without that, right? But that then drives going forward. You're going to set some base, whatever it is, 3%, whatever, and that goes back to your comment, right? That's going to give you're going to be 3% over this many people or whatever. It's going to give you a pool of dollars. Then you're going to take that pool of dollars, carve it up based on what people's ratings essentially are, and that's going to give implied percentages, right? So that's my view, because that's that gives you longer term sustainability, and you didn't necessarily make something for a year that then you're going to completely pivot from, because that'll be more consistent with what we did last year to some extent, right?
Yeah.
That's my view.
My concern about the scratching it and then putting money aside and funding it with unfilled personnel positions is that it's kind of like a crapshoot from year to year. And so, if we have a merit pool but we don't have the funds, what's the point? You know what I mean? You did great. Thank you so much, but we don't have funds to give it.
I don't think that's what you're saying.
No, I'm going back to kind of what you were talking about.
Well,
yes, sorry.
And to add to that comment would be I would do 2 pieces to that. One is a base funding, and a second is something along those lines, right? So you have base funding of it's X amount, and the only way you'd ever dip into the base funding is if you had a serious budget issue that you got to pull from. Because just like other companies, right? Bonuses. If the company is in trouble financially, you're not paying out bonuses. You're trying to deal with that. So the same thing would apply here, right?
So can you explain that just a little bit more, maybe the two of you? So still give everybody a flat rate for 2025,
And
But
start
then-
shoring up a program for merit, pool pay,
but
and
based
how
on
we
whatever that flat
do
rate
that.
is?
Well, yeah, and then you gotta get your compensation tables straightened out
Yep.
too, because it's not based on something realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have problems with that because we've got Robert Half Tech that came back with salaries that are just things we cannot do. And that's where my fear comes into, like, here's what we'll do with the unfunded positions. Well, we're always in a need, right? So that's the part where it's like, ew. And I do know what you're saying because I was, in the private sector, and I did receive bonuses, and every year it was subjective to, this is how the company did, here's our big, bag of money, and then we're going to divvy it out how we see fit, and that occurred, and that obviously fluctuated depending on how the company did, but we're always in a deficit. We always need money is my point, and that's the part where it's like, ugh.
I know one more biggest thing in a government or something like this, working here, and if someone is getting bonuses, people would think that, oh my God, look at them, they're taking our money and getting bonuses. So bonuses are not something, but if you keep that as part of the merit, I mean,
Right.
Well, and going back to your point, right, but then the flip side is what you had brought up earlier, which is the reason they give out bonuses is it's for the performance of that year, and it's not a multiplier. So there actually is a benefit to taxpayers in some respects because
Right.
you're not compounding pay for performance of a certain period, right? There's a piece
Exactly.
of that.
Well,
but
that's the key, yeah.
right,
Right.
and that's why that all got developed.
That's why the merit pool, regardless of how it gets developed, would have to be founded in that assumption that this does not mean that this is an automatic add to your overall
Right.
salary
Correct.
that gets compounded.
Once you give somebody something, you're not getting it back.
Yeah.
Jason had a hand. John wants to.
Wouldn't a lot of this though have to kind of fall on how that structure's going out? I don't think it's on us to develop what that's going to look like. It's more of something kind of have discussion and figure out like how they're going to build it, how it's going to look, how it's going to be executed.
Yeah, I mean, I think in concept, maybe, but being part of the personnel committee, I know that most things are happening in City Hall and by department heads, and then they're brought to the committee where they make and, they advise on things, but they're not actually doing creating the programs and working out the details and that sort of thing, which becomes a problem because not enough hours in the day. I certainly don't have enough time to
No, you're not
tackle
going to be touching
this.
that at all. No way. Sorry. I'm waiting my turn, but no way. She is not. So everybody's crystal clear. Kelly Hirsch will not be designing or doing that. She will not. Ready? So, giving a little bit of feedback to the electeds in the room. Okay, this concept of adding the 1%, this isn't, I wasn't blazing a trail down the, the wild, wild west. I mean, this has been done successfully in other areas. I'm not willing to fight for this on a hill, but I just want to make it crystal clear that apparently it works. West Dallas is still a functioning city. They didn't get sued. They're not in the paper. Looking at the others, okay, maybe I threw something out there. I thought that would be a good idea also to invest in a community, and that's why West Dallas did it. You could have Mayor Dan Devine come in here right now and tell you why it's working, why it's a good thing. And if you all think it's not, then it doesn't go forward. I don't have no heartburn with it. I just wanted to see those that live in our community get a little something extra because they are part of our community. They do care to stay here. I digress.
Well, and that's kind of why I wanted to just kind of talk about this a little bit to get some feedback and whatever, because it is going to come down to the elected officials, right? To either thumbs up or thumbs down on. But the one other point that I think that kind of came out of this, Kelly, you touched on it, is, and I've heard this throughout the municipality, is that when we bring somebody up through the ranks of the promotion and they get paid less than, somebody that would be brought in from the outside, it seems to me that that's a bigger detriment to retention
100%.
and it's like,
That causes the heartburn. That causes
Right.
the pain point.
because you go back to somebody that knows our community, trained, has knowledge, etc., and then they don't get the reward, that they probably, and those are probably the key people that we want. I mean, why did they get selected in the first place, if you will, to step in and take on those responsibilities, and then they're not going to be rewarded accordingly?
Right.
And again, maybe this is another separate topic or whatever, but it just kind of goes back to this whole retention, I think strategy or whatever, and it sounds like the city as a whole's got to do a better job in this arena.
Yeah, our policies just don't. I don't know if they fit for the time that they were created, but they really handicap us at this stage, and they're really a detriment.
So if you wanted to go outside of that, what is it, council approval?
Yeah, which I have brought things forward for council approval. Yeah, like that. Many promotions that I brought forward that fell outside of that framework. Probably because the framework doesn't work.
Yes, go ahead.
So going back, and so looping back on this, so what's the percentage of the overall budget that's personnel people?
79.
79%. Yeah, so it goes to 80%. So I mean, if you think about it, we're talking about that's the biggest chunk. People is by far the biggest chunk of our budget, and getting all of that rectified is a big deal because it is 80% of our budget.
But it's also it's what how do I put? I think it's like a motivator. It's a
Right,
big motivator for pretty much everybody because no matter who you are, you have bills to pay. How much bills you have to pay and where that all fits is subject to each person, but it's a huge motivator, and it's a morale killer or a motivator, and it is it absolutely is a huge sticking point and a problem when it comes to bringing somebody in outside because we're really not comparable, and also promoting from within with our policies, which are flawed. So it's everywhere you turn, and then our pay scales they're not done well.
Yeah, that's a
They're not done well. They're not comparable to where they need to be. And then at the end of all of that, every employee is told, and you're getting 65th percentile of what you could earn, regardless of what the range tells you, and regardless of the job you do, and it's going to take you 16 years working here at this rate to get there. That's a huge problem.
It just comes down to the financial aspect too. I mean, we are so limited that constantly promoting somebody or giving people raises because of, they deserve
Right.
this, and they just okay, the first question, what are you going to cut now? Where's that
Right.
money coming from? So
Right.
instead of doing those things consistently, it needs to come more from a performance base where we actually fund that, have that money set aside, and not trying to come back and always say, well, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? Yes and no, but really it should just come down to the answer is always no unless their performance is really well or whatever expectation you may have.
Well, yeah, and usually you tie those to there's like personal performance, and then there's usually like the overall, right? So that usually gets tied to financial results and all kinds of things, right? And department, those kind of things. So you can work to get, like, if you're looking for savings or like, you can build that into the metrics that you're using to assess that stuff as well, and then that way you're using right now the 80%, right, to go figure out how do we address the rest of the 20%, right, in a more efficient manner or whatever.
Yeah, I worked for, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, over the years, John, I think you agree with me on this. I mean, the unfunded personnel costs year after year always threw dollars back into the general fund balance. So I always made the comment that I look at it as, why are we taxing people for dollars we're not spending or paying out? But I think, John, you make an excellent point. If you know, we may sit here and look at all the trees, but we're missing the forest, because you go back to it, it's 80% of the people. If we don't have Danielle's or the lookalikes here, that's a problem. If we don't have Kelly and the lookalikes here, that's a problem. If we don't have department heads that are knowledgeable, educated, responsible, doing the things that the citizens kind of just, I don't want to say take for granted, but kind of behind the scenes, just
We expect.
assume or expect to be done. I mean, it goes back to your point. It's like, well, wait a minute. We could probably take this book and say, just give me the 80%, and if we get close to doing that right, the rest doesn't really matter.
Right.
Now, it's not that simple.
Right.
But I think you make an excellent point that, if we're not, maybe starting or leading with this first, because these are the people that are carrying the torches every day in and out. And whether it's, DPW and snow emergencies or police and extra events or elections and clerks or, whatever. I mean, they just are expected to be there, step up and get the job done.
And then there's those issues that are very much embedded in their minds, everybody's minds that work here, because I've heard it time and time again of how it's extremely deflating, and it sticks with people. It really does, and it sends the wrong message. So yeah, I think if we can try to fix that problem, which is massive, then maybe it will roll over into improving other areas. But what's the first step?
Well, and that's it. I mean,
What's the first step, and who's going to lead?
right.
that?
No, I think you got two key parts there. But I think from what I'm hearing, it's like, this is something that hasn't been done, has been talked about, et cetera, and then you got to do it with baby steps and baby dollars and whatever, and say, hey, how does this work? How's it, and we'll make mistakes with it, I'm sure, or there'll be some, fights or whatever. But it's not something that's going to happen, obviously, by the elected officials. I mean, they be overseeing it, be interested in its results and its impact, but
Or volunteers
right
on a committee.
Yep. And
No offense, but, outside of the meetings.
right. And again, I look at the committees. Sometimes I hear these. We've got whatever, plethora of them, and I kind of look at it. It's like, well, just having a committee for the sake of committee doesn't do me any good.
And
I've told that to John too. I said, if there's a point where the council doesn't think that this is valuable, I'm out it. I mean, I got other things I can do.
Absolutely.
My W-2 will not be,
you're not going to be hurting at home.
but at the same time, if it's adding value, I mean, I think that's.
Well, your efforts on the finance committee,
Yes.
everybody here, is absolutely vital and appreciated, and it's extremely important.
Right.
So,
And to that point, though, I 100% agree. There are committees and boards that are just burnout city for the staff that have to staff them. They have to provide the packets, the agendas, the minutes, and be the warm body that's in that seat and running that. And there are a lot of boards and commissions, committees that are not statutorily required, and I don't know that they necessarily add value, except for all those evening meetings.
Right.
I know that the city of Oak Creek has their personnel and finance combined, and I think that would make a lot of sense considering the fact that you guys are viewing the finance. 80% of our budget goes to personnel, and it would also make sense that we would be reviewing insurance policies and what have you together.
That sound great, Dennis?
Versus, well, but from a
Sorry to
financial
relieve.
standpoint, I think it makes sense.
Well, yeah, you bring up a good point, and I guess, yeah, some of this stuff has to generate or regurgitate from the city and the staffing itself. But, you know, I don't want to speak out of school, but I mean, in the private world, I mean, you know, sometimes their strategy is get rid of it first, and we'll see if anybody misses it in 6 months, and then we know the answer. That wasn't needed in the first place, right?
Right.
Or the one or two pieces that they did need, we picked up, got covered, and that's what was important. So it kind of gets back to John, you know, what's the 80-20 rule? Let's look at the personnel, make sure that, you know, we kind of have that dialed in, if you will, or at least where it is, versus that kind of just being the tail being wagged by the dog.
I mean, you know, I think that is definitely a direction that we need to go because, I mean, we have people, you know, some of the people that we are trying to obtain from other areas, and they're always going to go to the county because the meetings are done during the day. And we have, I don't know how many night meetings I have monthly, but it's a lot. It's a lot for what the value that it's adding for that time. And, you know, every meeting requires a meeting to establish what we're going to talk about and putting that forward. Right. So it's just such a detriment to spending time wisely and efficiently.
I think some good commentary. I'm not quite sure where this all goes or whatever, but I think it's a good food for thought. John, do you have something to add yet? Anyone else? All right, where are we? Are we set to?
Probably going to pass on number 4 until the next meeting when we can actually talk a little bit more about
Okay.
the rates.
So that'll be the
On the
22nd,
levy.
6 p.m.
Yep. And then the changes to dates again, I think,
Do that as well.
well, no, I think we should discuss the changes that don't impact the levy. So any of the funds like the capital and that kind of stuff that may have some changes recommended to the council, get those motioned and finalized so that those can go forward to the council and I can implement them into the budget. Because it's going to be a big meeting on the 22nd with those levy impacted ones. So the less we have to do then, and less we have to input into the budget on such a time crunch. So I could just go over the changes that I have, and if you guys have anything to add, please let me know. I don't know if you want me to like let you know what section it is, and you can turn to that. If
I would
you,
do that.
Yeah.
So we do that.
Yeah,
Sure.
let's just.
Okay, so the first one we'll just do is debt service, section 9. Page 276. So I wanted to note here that when I was going through this and I went all the way to the page 277 when it says what our net revenue and appropriations are, we have an extra $100,000 left over. I'd say to keep that more balanced, we should probably take $100,000 out and we can add it back to, or take it out of the tax levy and either, again, appropriate it to maybe the general fund or somewhere else, or whatever we see fit. Again, we'll talk about that on the 22nd, but I think that would be nice to take $100,000 out there and reappropriate it somewhere else.
There's probably really no advantage to having it built
Sitting in the-
fund
no.
balance that service, right?
No.
Anybody else comments? No.
Yeah, as long as the tax levy and the impact fees, and this year at least, I mean, it pays our bond payments, then we really don't need to have any collection levy in there. So
Okay.
that was the first change that I had. I'm just going down my spreadsheet. So the next one is capital outlay, which was section 8, page 235. So the anticipated changes, which I'll say, I'll go through them, but it still keeps us in the black, 66,000. The anticipated changes were, 236. Yep. So we're gonna go to page 238. And about halfway down, you'll see the fleet lease program for the 310,000. We're gonna decrease that to only 40,000. That's really all we need to fund the lease program for the police department in 2025.
That'll include the 240 that's carryover from this year. Am I looking at that correctly? Because you said that we had purchases already for this year
That doesn't, yep. So that's the 240, or minusing the 240 plus minusing a little bit extra from 2024. The non-use of having all the vehicles funded in 2025.
Okay.
We only needed minusing the 240 from 2024 and getting a more itemized of what's actually available and what will be spent. It was only about 36,000 was going to be needed for 2025, so I just said a flat 40 would be fine.
So the remainder would be for 2026.
No, we're just taking out the 270 and we're allocating it to other projects. Page 237, right in the middle under administration software, the 20,000, we were taking that out completely. And we're gonna add, you can cross it off and put the 48,575, and that's for the ClearGov software, the budgeting and ACFR software.
48 what?
575.
What page was that on?
237. Cross out the 20,000 and put 48,575. These are the changes, the recommended changes. Obviously, if you guys don't agree, please speak up.
I thought we just discussed and we wanted to put that, add that 20,000 as well, so from somewhere else. Did I not hear it right?
No, we were taking it out because we were now going to consider using the website development when we do the more cloud migration.
Yeah, so the 20, it's the
20,000 website, we thought.
that was gonna offset the ClearGov, and then the other one that'll be coming up is the switch. There's like 80-some thousand in there for the switches, that's the one we were talking about for.
So are you recommending to keep that 81,000 in there for the switches and just move forward with the looking into the cloud-based option in 2025? Or are we looking to take out the 80, because he has like 300,000 between 2028 and 20.
Yeah, which is a lot of like which is like a lot of PC and stuff, and you're still gonna need to do those kind of things.
Even those things, if you look at it, he put a lot of virtualization.
Correct.
He put which is basically you don't need a hard PC, but it's a virtual PC. So that's going to also get rid of a lot of those PC hardware, but that's fine. I don't know how much is the budget, but he put under that, you see there, cloud migration, desktop virtualization. But that's, he put at the end.
Yeah, I guess my view would be is to take some of the 80 that's out there and for the assessment and everything like that, so and what you're going to do from that to move to cloud, because once you spend that 80 on the switches, that money's gone, and those switches are probably at least have a 5-year, 10-year life on them, so you've kind of money. Yeah, correct.
So do we take the full 81,000 out and not allocate it to anything else, but maybe keep that extra revenue in there so that the IT director can look into it in 2025, and then we can always come back with a budget amendment in 2025, knowing that we had at least that 80,000
earmark it.
Earmark it and get on the other side of the assessment, and then go from there.
Okay, so then we just have to look and see. I don't remember how much, what the exact amount is.
Well, and the reality is the website redesign, 20 grand's not enough. I mean, it's like 5,000, 6,000 under what the lowest bid was, and that's, basic. So combining all of that might be the best and most sensible way to go.
So
with
my
that strategy.
my comment to you, John, is though
Yeah.
it's 81,000 times 2 because it's data switches for the city hall and then data switches for the PD. So it's actually 162,000 that we have in the budget.
Oh.
So are we trying to take both of those out and have him look into it, or only do city hall and have him, or I'm sorry, only do PD and have him look at city hall first?
Where is that?
Page 211 at the bottom.
Just thinking out loud,
Yeah.
is this something we've already promised him, and is this a need? Is this a current need?
It came out of the discussion we had, but I think the need was, hey, we gotta replace all this other stuff, and then we had the discussion around, we gotta start looking at cloud. So,
I know, but I'm saying, like, I'm unclear on if he's already expecting it, it's already, like, mentally spent
Yeah.
on things that we absolutely have to have because we don't have another plan in place. That's my only, like, caveat is maybe this is
Well, it
a
shouldn't be
conversation
expected.
we should.
I mean, it should.
yeah, I'm
But-
okay with the conversation. I would say though, we gotta, unless there is something that's gonna break, we should at least, and it could be that we can only do half, right now we're gonna do one side PD or whatever, right? And the other side we're gonna start working on cloud or whatever. But we should use some of it to start moving there. And because I get you, the longer you go on this stuff,
Right.
it's gonna and all that.
So again, should we just take both of them out and have a further discussion with him? Again, we can always,
Because the money's still there.
Yeah,
Right,
as
so-
long as
I would
as long as we
earmark
earmarked
it,
it
make
to
sure,
IT,
yep,
and
make
then
sure it's
I'm good with
so we
that.
know
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
defined, yeah.
Yeah, we'll keep it there, but we can maybe investigate further and see what options we have. And
Yeah, I mean, I
if you're
think,
going in that direction, then we may-
yeah.
Mhm.
100% we should be doing that. That makes sense, planning for the future and not just trying to maintain or keep up with what's always been the case. We should be looking into all those avenues strategically. My only concern is how does this impact his operation?
Yeah, like operation.
right now,
yeah.
yes.
And that's why I think it's important to keep it in IT.
Right.
And if there's something that has to be done, then we'll.
Yep.
Right.
okay, so again, am I taking this out of am I recommending to council that we take out the 162,000, but we're not allocating it to anything else in 2025?
How do we do that if it's going to stay to IT?
I think it's gotta be earmarked.
So
So
if
do we
it,
earmark
But we
it?
don't
and then-
necessarily, so our budget policy doesn't allow us to earmark it. What it allows us to do is come back, we can keep it as is and come back with a budget amendment that reappropriates it,
It
but to a different use.
no, I mean, I think at least what I'm trying to say here is that if that money is kept there, whatever we are trying to do with the cloud-based and whatever we come out of that, we will still use it for something else rather than investing in that hardware, because that hardware you're buying, and say like in 2026, if you're moving to cloud, if you don't need that, it's a waste, right? So what we're saying is that if you look at, if you study and say it's, we don't need that right now because we're moving to cloud, then we might spend that money for something where we're moving to the cloud. We may have to still spend some money there. So we'll use that money. So we'll keep that as IT, and we'll use it for something related to IT if you're not using it. But in case we're not doing, he at least has that budgeted.
Like I said, it's
Sounds like.
That's what
it
I'm
needs to
saying.
stay in,
It
and
needs
then
to
we'll just
stay in,
have
but we just
anything
budget
over
it.
$5,000 back for a budget. Fine.
Alderman Pepperell's on technology committee, so I think, the next time they have a meeting, maybe it's
Yep.
something that just comes forward on that agenda to discuss this budget piece, so,
Yes.
So
So we can keep moving that
the
forward.
director of IT.
Yeah.
Perfect. Absolutely. Keep that in then. And the next one I had was the. Let's find it on here. So page 238. If you see towards the bottom where the $36,000 is, right under that is blank. For building improvements, we're putting in $50,000 in that blank spot, and that would be for the mold remediation at Station 1.
So does that cover kind of that entire project?
No, so the major scope of the project is being done by Johnson Controls. However, Johnson Controls, due to the amount of mold, did not want to basically get involved in the mold remediation part of it. So we need to hire an outside company to come do the mold remediation, and then Johnson Controls will come in and do the Station 1 remodel part of their project.
Well, it's more of an envelope piece and
Yeah.
chillers and coolers, so it's not necessarily like it's not going to be nicely remodeled on the inside.
Right, no,
it
it just,
And the windows will still
Just the energy
be in the,
efficiency.
you know,
Synergy.
yeah, right.
but this needed to be done prior to them
Right.
doing their piece, or at the same time.
Right.
So just do that for a second though. So we're gonna do the mold remediation. We're gonna fund the mold remediation. Is any of, but we're not fixing the source of how it's getting there to begin with yet.
We are. Johnson Controls is doing
Is
that
doing
piece.
that.
Yep.
So that once we remediate it, we shouldn't have recurrence.
No, correct.
They're not replacing windows. They're doing like pin tuck and stuff like that.
But
Like tuck
they're
pointing.
Or tuck point,
fixing.
thank you.
But they were supposed to be fixing all of the issues about where the mold is coming in. I don't know if it was windows, but it was.
For the moisture.
Right, because that'll be like the building itself, the envelope part of it, the outside where things are coming in. But again, the windows are a problem and do need to be replaced. I don't know if that's considered or not. And if they're not replaced, then there's no point in doing mold remediation. It'll, to your point, it'll
Well, I
just
want to
continue
believe,
be a
I don't
problem.
remember Chief Mayor's presentation fully, but I don't know if I don't believe the 50,000 or whatever they requested was just for that piece.
75, I thought. or
I
something like
want to
that.
say, I mean, they put Station 1 remodel, so. Pull up there.
It's, well, this is in the handout he gave us. It said, remediate damage and spread of mold caused by water leakage, exterior brick, and window leaks. Replace windows in original front portion of the fire station, including the front public entrance, front office, and kitchen.
Okay, so
They
then
had
that's what
78
we're.
And they had 78,000 as the estimate because they had a quote from someone that was somewhere around
Kellerman
that.
or something like
Yeah.
that for restoration. But I thought that they did they have solid quotes on the windows?
I thought it was with everything combined.
Yeah,
it was
okay.
the
Hellman
whole
was the
shebang.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
was the whole package, but after obviously further discussion, we dropped it to 50,000. Already move on to the next one, just right above that, under police department, right above the 158, 145. In that blank space, other capital equipment, that's where we're putting the tasers and the body cameras. So that total amount is 117,670. 117,670, I feel like a bingo call. And the one thing I just wanted to remind everybody on that piece is this is a 5-year commitment. Instead of funding the full $600,000 up front, both vendors are giving us a 5-year commitment with no interest. So it'll be this same price for the next 5 years.
Phased.
And also, I believe, if I remember correctly, and I wanted to get the final amount, but if approved, he doesn't have the full information yet, but if approved, those body cameras, I believe we have a pilot that he's looking into getting a grant that I think was like 20,000, but I didn't include it here because we don't know if we have it yet. And then last, I added a $10,000 because that's typically what we've been doing, which again is right above that in the blank next to $10,000. I figured we'd add that back in just in case. Always nice to have that. And then after all those changes, we still come out with $66,000 left over, which we are just going to hold on to. And that's, again, due to the those 2FA tokens.
Yeah, because it pulled that forward in 2024.
Correct. Don't go too far from there. We're going to go to there was no changes in equipment replacement. All that just kind of stayed the same. Capital improvement, page 253.
This makes me appreciate electronic documents.
Well, and typically after all of this, or I should say before, I think last year I provided a nice spreadsheet because it was not as late in the game and things were a little bit more final, so it wasn't as bad. And you'll get it, just probably not till the 22nd. So the capital improvement fund, the only changes that we have, and it is going to even out our budget and balance it at zero, is we have to take out the $2 million borrow, and right above that, above the 995,100, you can put 857,800. I believe that was the determination that we were going to use general fund dollars for capital projects. You guys think otherwise?
Well, we're above our target range, so I mean,
By a lot, yeah. And again, those are for committed projects, DOT projects. And then by taking the $2 million away, adding 857, and then we have to add, you go to page 255, towards the bottom where that 1,265,000 is at, we have to add 169,400. So it's going to change to 1,434,400. And that's because, one, we didn't get the TAP grant. Two, we got the updated estimate from the DOT a couple weeks ago, and then the 10%. So that will make our net at zero. So that fund is completely balanced. If anybody has questions on the capital improvement.
Yeah, what was that last change there?
Page 255.
Right.
The trail project, the $1 million project, it has to increase. It's going to be 1,434,400. Next is street improvement, so page 260. Our transportation aid, so the 1,470,000 at the top, that's going to go up to 1,486,000. Which then we're just going to increase the expenditure towards the bottom, the 2 million to 2,356,000. 268. I made that boo-boo on the water impact fee, so it should be 750,000 instead of 75,000. We're gonna increase that.
Fourth line down.
Yep, the fourth line down, impact fee water, 75,000 should be 750, or 750.
700. I'll flip that. Right?
And that revenue appropriations, yes. It'll bring us to 351,982. On page 269, the bottom where the net the revenue and appropriations are right now, it's negative 23. Actually make it positive now, so we'll have more revenue. So it's 351,982.
Positive.
Positive, yep.
Carb skill. I had carbs before I came here. Easy snacks to eat.
So that is all that I have for changes that don't impact the levy. So the 4 levy that we have, other than, I mean, I guess we did do the street improvement fund, but those are mine. Debt levy, or debt service fund, the general fund, and the library. Those are the 3 that we will go over on the 22nd when we finalize or draw down what our levy is actually going to. So, discussing all the changes, does anybody have any further changes that they want to talk about that we didn't mention on any of these funds, or any funds that I didn't mention? I don't remember having any changes to the TID funds. I don't have any further changes.
There wasn't anything that.
What was that?
Okay, so I guess I'll take this. So there was the our director of maintenance that came in here about tools. And did we say that we were going to look to get him money to buy some tools to here at City Hall, or did we decide? Because I know I mentioned to him to go get whatever tools he needs from DPW and work, but it wouldn't be a bad idea if we were to build a little bit of a tool inventory here. Not much, I'm saying
Essential stuff here.
essential tools. I mean, if you put $500 in them, you can get an amazing amount of things for $500.
I'm just saying, yeah, I mean, I can add that to the list.
1,000-piece
talk
ratchets,
about
that's $9.99.
under the general fund. That's
Okay.
Joe?
That was one on my list,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Joe.
John's got it. So, okay, was that Mira? What you were talking about? Because he cannot use his own tool, for sure.
No, absolutely. Like I said, and this is what I want is for you guys to bring these forward so that when we are going through the general fund, I have all these. Anyone else?
The only other one I had, that at this point that was somewhat minor, but it was for fire again. The testing they needed to do for their breathing cylinders, that was the DOT requirement. It was an additional, I think, $6,000 on that line item to get it so that they could do all of them. I did suggest that they kind of stagger them as best they can from now on, so they don't have to do them all at the same time. So it's not as big of an ask, but
It was 6,000. I have that written down here.
Yeah, it was an extra 6,000 from what was on the recommended line.
Yeah, okay, yep, I have that one.
Yeah.
Are we talking operations now?
I'm just wanting to, anything that anybody wants to talk about before we move forward with what
Sure.
I would say a motion to at least recommend changes we just went over to the council.
Were a couple things that the municipal judge wanted, right?
Carpeting
Well,
for
that
the
was a
tune
big
of
one.
25 grand.
But no,
Yeah.
because she's already getting that. That was in this year's budget.
There were a couple
It was,
things.
you missed that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I will, tomorrow I will go back and listen.
She
to
made my
the
palms
audio.
sweat a little bit. I mean, she came rocked and she was locked in for her first budget.
But wasn't there a couple of small minor things operationally that she had, I don't know if it's the training or, what, and I,
Translation line was already accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's
what I was
done.
thinking, council.
okay,
That was it, I think.
okay.
Like I said, I'll make it a point to go through the
The
Audio.
Yeah.
and listen to it so that when we come back on the 22nd, I'll have all of the requests. And like I said, at that point, we'll be able to see how much money we have and what we can actually recommend forward. But,
Okay.
okay. So again, I guess we just would be entertaining a motion.
But
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I think originally in their ask, they also had 7,000 for that radiator in the fire department.
Okay.
The radiator, because it'll overheat because it won't pass the pump certification test.
Is that on radio maintenance? That
Yeah, I'm checking
it's on 5245.
Automate.
And not radio auto, the aging piece, but it's, can't use it unless they get a new
So I
radio.
have 13,000 is what they're asking for additionally.
There's two things. There were two things.
There were two things in
Line
there.
item.
One was
Okay.
corrosion and one was the overheating. I mean, I understand the corrosion and everything, but it isn't getting that for a little bit. But the radiator one, you can't really work around that one.
Okay, so you're
Because they've kind of patched it up to this point.
Right.
Did mention the possibility of budget, if there was anything left in it for this year, that they could maybe use that to pay for it as well. So I don't know what the numbers look like for that.
That's my only other item.
Good catch.
Yeah, pretty much everything that, because that's when I was here, that first meeting, when the department heads were talking, I wrote it down so that at least I know when I'm going back and trying to balance. But with not being here, I don't know from the second meeting, so I'll go back and add those.
Okay, anything else anybody has? Otherwise, you want to recommendation to accept the changes on the capital side?
I can read the motion. It would be, I move to recommend to the Common Council the 2025 Mayor's recommended budget, along with the previous tentative actions of the Finance Committee as follows by the committee, and then would include a summary of what we just went over.
So excluding the general.
Correct. I'd be happy. I can put that in the only moving forward the debt service fund, capital outlay fund, capital improvement fund, street improvement fund, impact fund for the ones that we went over tonight and reviewed.
We have a set maker of that
Yeah,
motion.
okay.
I'll second.
So a motion and a second, further discussion? Anyone? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion. And that'll probably get reconsumed by another one on the 22nd, I mean. Probably roll it all up together. General fund.
Yep.
But at least as of today's,
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to get at least the part forward to the council, we can get some of that moving. Like I said, then I can input it in my budget and it's not a bunch of work on one night, so.
Okay, anything else? Next meeting date then, as Danielle alluded to, would be Tuesday the 22nd. That's a regular scheduled night. We want to start that at 6 again, or there'll probably be a little bit of activity.
I'm okay with moving it to 5 if everybody else is okay with moving it to 5, as yes, it'll probably be some discussion.
Does that make sense, or what's the flavor of the
Yes.
5 o'clock, am I hearing? Let's do that. I think it actually start on it, because we'll have all the general budget stuff. There'll be a fair amount of discussion, I'm sure, plus playing with the numbers back and forth. All right, that being said, 22nd then at 5 p.m. Anything else for the finance?
We adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Kelly.